One thing I think about a lot when I see projects of this magnitude is how America keeps trying to engineer community through development. But community isn't just architecture, right? It's culture, history, identity. It takes time to build a community. The genuine feel of community isn't just going to be there at the time of the ribbon cutting, right? It takes time to build that energy, that vibe. Now, I also want to point out how the number changed from 200 to 300 million, right? That alone tells you how layered and complicated these financing structures can become. Let me ask your thoughts on something. When the city approves hundreds of millions of dollars in tax incentives for a private development project, is that smart economic strategy? Or do you think that's more or less corporate welfare with prettier renderings? Sterling Heights just approved massive incentives for a $1 billion redevelopment of the old Lakeside Mall site. And depending on who you ask, this is either the future of suburban America or another giant real estate gamble wrapped in buzzwords like transformational, economic impact, those types of words. But honestly, this story matters way beyond this particular development because what we're really watching here is the collapse of the old suburban mall model and the desperate race across America to reinvent dead retail into something people actually want to live in. All right, so here's the quick breakdown. Sterling Heights City Council unanimously approved major tax incentives tied to the redevelopment of the old Lakeside Mall. This is a $1 billion redevelopment being led by Miami-based developer Lionheart Capital. The new vision is called Lakeside Town Center, and what they're wanting to do with this site, instead of it being a traditional enclosed mall, they want it to encompass things like retail, housing, entertainment, walkable streets, mixed-use development, public gathering spaces, with roughly $200 to $300 million in tax incentives tied to this overall project.
These are the early renderings for the Lakeside City Center, envisioned to take the place of the old shopping center. It has a $1 billion price tag. And this week, Sterling Heights City Council gave its stamp of approval for tax incentives on the project. Our Gino Vici is getting answers on what this means for taxpayers.
Yes, the redevelopment of the old Lakeside Mall here in Sterling Heights overcame a major hurdle last night. Sterling Heights City Council approving a nearly $200 million tax incentive. But the question is, who's going to pay for it? Well, tonight, we're getting answers.
Okay, so one of the first things I want to immediately point out here is how beautiful these renderings look, right? This place looks phenomenal. However, renderings are more so emotional marketing tools. Most developers understand that people react emotionally to visuals far before they react intellectually to financial structures, zoning, or long-term economics. I also want to point out the language that they're using, right? City center, right? This is important because this isn't just a mall redevelopment. This is a suburban repositioning. Suburbs across America are trying to create walkable downtown environments because traditional suburban retail models are struggling. What else is fascinating is that many suburbs are now trying to recreate the kind of mixed-use density older cities already historically had. People hear $1 billion project and imagine developers swimming in cash like Scrooge McDuck. No, a $1 billion project today is basically controlled chaos, especially in this interest rate environment. Construction costs have exploded since COVID. Steel, concrete, insurance, labor, financing, utility infrastructure. Even simple multifamily projects are becoming extremely difficult to finance right now. So when you hear $1 billion, understand that that doesn't automatically mean massive profit.
This truly is a transformative project. It will transform this area, not just Lakeside proper, but the entire region.
Sterling Heights City Manager Mark Vanderpool says he couldn't be more excited that City Council unanimously approved a $300 million tax incentive for the roughly $1 billion redevelopment of the old Lakeside Mall here on Hall Road. It's called Lakeside Town Center. But it's how these incentives will be paid that Vanderpool says is very unique, and he says Sterling Heights residents will not be flipping the bill for it. Here's why.
Now, most of that comes from state capture, sales tax, income tax, and also property tax capture as well. But no one else in the community is burdened by increased taxes. It's only new taxes that are created by this development.
Now, this is where people get either excited or furious. Most people think the city is just handing developers cash. Usually it's more complicated than that. Most likely this involves some form of TIF or tax increment financing, brownfield incentives, property tax capture, sales tax capture. What does that mean? That means future taxes guaranteed by the project help finance the project itself. But let's ask the uncomfortable question that some residents may have, which is, if it's such an amazing project, why does it need public participation? We're talking over $200 million in public funding support, right? Tax incentives. And so you have people that are either on the side of this is corruption or this is economic growth. It's a little more nuanced than that, right? It's usually somewhere in the middle. Large-scale redevelopment today often requires public-private partnerships because cities themselves benefit from long-term tax-based growth. And a dead mall produces declining economic value. So cities are terrified of large, dead commercial corridors because they create lower surrounding property values, reduced tax revenue, blight risk. These are big concerns that cities that need to be able to survive are concerned about, which is why they're calling this project transformative, right? But the real question is, transformative for who? Will this redevelopment primarily benefit residents, developers, retailers, high-income newcomers? Probably all of the above to varying degrees. One thing I think about a lot when I see projects of this magnitude is how America keeps trying to engineer community through development. But community isn't just architecture, right? It's culture, history, identity. It takes time to build a community. The genuine feel of community isn't just going to be there at the time of the ribbon cutting, right? It takes time to build that energy, that vibe. Now, I also want to point out how the number changed from 200 to 300 million, right? That alone tells you how layered and complicated these financing structures can become. These mega projects usually stack multiple incentive programs together. Things like state incentives, local capture districts, brownfield reimbursement, infrastructure support, federal opportunity zones, utility support, bond financing, you name it. A lot of people think development is mostly construction, but honestly, modern development is often more about finance structuring than buildings. Now, when it comes to the statement of residents not footing the bill, well, technically that statement is mostly true. But this is where wording matters, right? The city manager is referring to future tax capture, which means they're not raising current taxes on residents. But future tax revenue generated by the project may be redirected back into project financing instead of fully flowing into schools or public services immediately. Now, that doesn't automatically make this bad, all right? Let's be clear, but viewers should understand the distinction. When they're talking about sales tax, income tax, property tax capture, this is basically the government saying, we believe future economic activity from this development will outweigh the cost of incentivizing it. The public sector is betting on long-term economic stimulation. The developer is betting on long-term market demand. With all of that said, cities are now becoming increasingly aggressive with incentives because they're competing for tax-based survival.
Vanderpool walked us through this rendering of the site, which will feature retail shopping and lots of living options. The old Lakeside Mall is being redeveloped by Lionheart Capital based in Miami, Florida. It will soon be the new downtown city center, something that Vanderpool says residents should be excited for.
So translation, mixed-use development, right? This is the buzzword of modern urban planning. Mixed use combines housing, restaurants, retail, entertainment, offices, public space into one connected district. Cities love mixed use because it creates more tax density, more activity, longer visitor stays, reduced car dependency, stronger economic resilience. Detroit spent decades trying to rebuild density after population decline. Now we're seeing suburbs trying to retrofit themselves into urban environments. Now, when it comes to the downtown city center statement, right? Sterling Heights historically developed around cars and suburban sprawl. Now they're trying to create a centralized identity. Once again, a lot of suburbs are realizing you can't build long-term economic energy around parking lots forever. Here's the challenge. You can build buildings quickly. You can't instantly manufacture culture.
The thousands of jobs that are going to be created just from the construction activity over the next 5-7 years is enormous. The economic impact is significant.
To be fair, construction does create real economic activity. We're talking construction jobs, engineering work, architectural contracts, suppliers, subcontractor demand, utility upgrades, right? Local spending ripple effects, not only at this site, but these folks need to eat, right? These folks potentially need lodging and other services. And so it's going to be an economic boon for the surrounding area throughout the project's build out phase. But one of the most important questions that needs to consistently be asked is what happens after construction, right? Can the long-term retail and housing demand actually sustain the vision? Now, when it comes to the 5 to 7 year time frame of completion of a development like this, I would say that's a bit optimistic. When we're talking about mega development such as what we're looking at here, you're almost always going to take longer than initially projected.
Well, the next step in this nearly $1 billion redevelopment of the old Lakeside Mall, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation now has to approve its incentives at the state level. If all goes as planned there could be a groundbreaking here in early as the middle of 2027. In Sterling Heights, Gino Vici, I'm Getting Answers.
Now, when it comes to the MEDC, shout out to the MEDC because they've helped me stand up a project in the past. Phenomenal organization and team. The Michigan Economic Development Corporation is one of the biggest economic development players in Michigan. The MEDC has enormous influence over incentive approvals, job creation strategy, redevelopment funding, corporate attraction efforts, right? States today are continuously competing against each other for investment. Economic development has basically become regional warfare. So overall, I actually think this project makes sense conceptually. A dead mall sitting on prime infrastructure is wasted economic potential. The bigger question here is execution, right? Can they phase it correctly? Are they able to attract enough tenants? Can they create real community? Can they survive economic cycles throughout the process of development and beyond? Can they maintain affordability? Can they avoid becoming another over-rendered lifestyle project? Because America at this point has a lot of beautiful renderings. What it needs more of is durable places people actually connect to. But I would love to hear from you. Would you support hundreds of millions of dollars in incentives for a project like this? Do suburbs need projects like this to survive long term? Or are taxpayers taking on too much indirect risk? Would love to know your thoughts in the comment section below. I also have a Patreon community where I talk a little bit more low level when it comes to development, entrepreneurship. Would love to welcome you over there as well. See you in the next video. She's just like you and me, but she's homeless. She's homeless. Man, this was a great video and song.